an employer that thinks it needs to count its employees' mouse clicks doesn't really know how it wants to measure employee performance, or it hasn't come up with a better way of doing it. And so you create this incentive for the employee to spend $50 on an Amazon mouse clicker rather than the employee just becoming better at their job and providing, better output, quality, whatever it is they're supposed to be putting together.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Today is December 26th, so you have 5 days to lose 25 pounds, pay off your debt, and maybe learn a new language or whatever other resolutions you set for 2024 11 months and 26 days ago. It is also the last episode of 2024, which means it's time for our monthly conversation about recent HR-related news items. And this month, remote employees have been in the news. We've got North Koreans, employees juggling full-time jobs, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and of all things, mouse jigglers. Joining me to make sense of all of this is returning guest, Patrick Richter. Patrick is a partner at Rigby Slack, an Austin-based law firm serving businesses across the U.S. Patrick is board certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization in labor and employment law, and he represents employers nationally in all types of employment disputes, including class and collective actions. He also has considerable experience with matters before the National Labor Relations Board and in assisting clients with union avoidance. Welcome back to Good Morning HR, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with this crazy stuff that's going on with North Korea. It's been going on all year, and it's been unfolding story by story. Some people were arrested in Arizona for facilitating this, but basically, North Korea has been using the increasing amount of remote work that U.S. companies are doing, especially tech firms, and stealing the identities of American workers by posting fake jobs and getting people to apply for them and collecting all their PII, then turning around and applying for real jobs in the U.S., and then doing the work remotely from North Korea or China and collecting the income, but also in some cases stealing a lot of U.S. companies' data and sometimes holding it for ransom. I mean, if I'm hiring a tech guy and he's got control of my server, I'm probably going to pay whoever demands the money. And so, according to the Justice Department, at least $88 million has been transferred to North Korea from U.S. companies through all this fraud. And this week, the Department of Justice put out a $5 million reward for more information about any this alleged scheme, any kind of stuff going on. This is kind of, this wasn't something you could do when we weren't all remote, right? This was something that, right. Somebody's physically walking into your office and sitting down every day. But this is one of the things that, we all love remote work, but this is one of those things where you've got to have some systems in place to really catch this.
Yeah, $88 million is a lot of ransom for some company trade secrets. And, whenever I see a story like this and I see a number like that, my guess is it's a tip of the iceberg, because there's probably plenty of companies that haven't reported it for any number of reasons, whether, just to avoid being publicly embarrassed or not wanting to make shareholders or customers mad about it.
Well, and how many of these companies, we know about the ones that were there. 14 people were indicted, 14 of these North Korean, I assume they're in North Korea, but they were indicted in the U.S. They'll never get prosecuted.
Right.
But that's only 14. I think they've identified about 130 actual individual situations, but how many are still out there? That's the thing. Talk about the tip of the iceberg, the ones who are still working for employers, and the employer thinks and it's in the U.S. you can't say, well, you look Asian, so I'm not going to hire you. So
right.
So we're on the Zoom call on occasion with this person, and he's competent, he's doing the job. What's the problem? Well, the problem is he's using somebody else's identity, and you're violating all kinds of sanctions issues by transferring money, through, you're paying somebody to some account, and then that's getting sent over to North Korea. So it's kind of crazy. So you're right. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. And we've seen a couple instances with similar, not necessarily North Korea, but we had a situation earlier this year with one of our tech clients where one of my employees' spidey sense just kind of went off, and this is somebody who had a lot of tech experience and seemed to know in the interview apparently what they were talking about. But when we started checking their references, all of their employers for these, they named these big employers they worked for. But when we started digging in, the employers had never heard of them through HR. And then they said, oh, well, I worked for these contracting agencies. I never worked directly for the employer. Then you start checking those contracting agencies' websites, and like some of the links don't work. And you start looking at when the domains were registered, and it was just like days before they even started the background check.
So many of those tech companies use those contractors in some ways to avoid taking on the liability of having employees in the first place. And then, like you said, you go to try to check references or check up on, did this person really work for, Apple or Oracle? And you instead find that they say they worked through a subcontractor. That subcontractor might look shady, even if they were legit.
Right. And a lot of them
and they
are.
weren't,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. And they weren't, a North Korean shell. And then the situation you're talking about with the North Koreans, the harder problem there is you stole a real person's identity. So if they stole your identity and I went to check on you, I'd see a guy who's real, who's in Texas, who does what he does. I would have no reason to know that somebody was, pretending to be you until it's too late.
Right. And that I think that's the big problem is, if it was a physical world and I was walking in the office, I couldn't steal this guy. You look at my LinkedIn picture and say, oh, this guy I'm interviewing in person is not nearly as ugly as that guy in that LinkedIn picture. So it's not the same dude. But, when you don't have all of that, how do you figure that out? And some of this, and I know of one situation where somebody, a company that I'm familiar with, was almost infiltrated by this North Korean thing. And what happened is they sent the laptop to the new employee, and the new employee had an address in Arizona, I think it was, and that's where a lot of these were going. And basically the North Koreans are paying this woman in North Korea. All these laptops are coming in, and she's basically running like a server farm with these laptops. And then the North Koreans were remoting in, but everything was a US IP address. All the laptops were here in the US. And so as far as that one employer goes, it looked like that employee was working in Arizona. And right. So, but as soon as the one employer that's a tech company that I know of that got involved with the North Korea thing, as soon as that employee the first time they logged in, a whole bunch of malware started getting downloaded to the computer. And they're a tech company with good security. And so alarms went off everywhere, and they're like, okay, so what's going on here? And they blocked this person's access and started digging in, and ultimately got involved with the FBI and some other stuff. So if you've got good cybersecurity, but yeah.
A similar thing happened to one of my clients, and they'd gone so far as to send the guy the laptop, and then they started having, questions about whether this person was the person they'd interviewed or not. They didn't get so far as to worrying about where he was, and they didn't really try to track it down. They just locked him out. Once they decided that it was fishy, and they couldn't convince themselves that it wasn't, they just fired him and then wrote off the cost of the laptop and didn't worry about it anymore. Locked him out of all their systems and just moved on.
Well, and that's the other thing that's happening is people who aren't competent for certain roles, who know a little bit about it, but they're not, they're going to be the best candidate, are getting other people to attend the Zoom interviews for them. So the subject matter expert who's really good is on the Zoom interview. And especially if they're, let's just say it non-white, like most of the tech industry is largely white or South Asian, I guess. But you get somebody who's, they're on a Zoom call during the interview, and maybe you do group interviews and everybody's looking, it's great, he's got the job. And then 2 weeks in, this guy's showing up for Zoom meetings with his camera off, or when he does turn his camera on, you're like, is that the guy we interviewed? And how do you remember how many, and if you do, 5, 6, 7 interviews, and the way tech companies drag interviews out sometimes over 5, 6 weeks, maybe that's them, maybe it's not, and you're not sure, but they're not competent, and so you're going to put them through your performance management process or something. It's kind of a really challenging situation. And now that so many companies are doing I-9 verifications remotely, so you're
Right.
not really holding, looking at an original document. In fact, we're about to implement a biometric process where the actual ID is shown to the individual, shows the ID to the camera, and the AI on the back end can read the machine readable code on the back of the driver's license or passport, even foreign IDs, and compare it to the picture and give you a probability of whether it's the same person and all of that stuff. Because how else are you going to replicate that, if they say that. So we're looking at a couple solutions for that for some of our clients who are just need a better, need more security, more confidence. Right. But that whole due diligence on the front end has got to happen. And I mean, of course, the background check guy is going to say that. But if all your applicants were honest, I'd be out of work. And so the fact is, and if they were all honest, your life, you wouldn't have 3 yachts and two mansions, as an employment law attorney.
Yeah, and this is all stems from the boom in remote work and even to the point of remote interviews. Like you may never be in the same room as somebody you're hiring for a very sensitive position. It opens the door for that kind of mischief.
And employers are hiring people internationally too. I mean,
right.
Through contractors. I talked to a lot of employers who say, yeah, we're hiring, programmers or accountants and people like that on Upwork. And there's no due diligence on Upwork. Upwork's not saying we know who this person is, who says they're in Europe or South Asia or wherever, Mexico. But hey, they seem to have competency, so we'll hire them. And let's give them the key, access to our network and everything at the same time. Those are the issues. And so
in general, though, that, network access and information security is a lot slipperier. That's hard to say. More difficult when employees are working remote, even if everything else is legit.
Right.
I do a lot of trade secret and non-compete litigation. And, you used to always just go and check the employee's work computer and see how much stuff did they send to their Gmail, or get a printout of how many times was a thumb drive plugged into their laptop. And with people able to work remote and people just generally being a little more tech savvy, with VPN access and other things, like the number of ways employees who want to do mischief and take sensitive information, that there are a lot more avenues to do it than there used to be.
Well, and my employees are remote. We went remote in 2020. I never dreamed we would, and it worked really well for us in our environment. But all my employees are working on company equipment. All the USB ports are dead. We've got a remote access system, so they're working on a server in Dallas. Each instance of their desktop is on a server in Dallas, and we're using the internet as a cable monitor, basically. And those local machines get wiped as soon as they turn them off. So there's no data stored locally. But a lot of companies, I'm still hearing from employers who say, yeah, you can use your personal computer to do work. And connect to our network with your personal computer and things like that. And I'm like, I just can't imagine that.
My best pandemic stealing information story, it was a friend of mine was involved in this, but the guy completely went anti-technology because no one was at the office. He went to work. He went into the office during normal hours, so he didn't have to badge in or badge out, and printed out like a banker's box full of information. So when he left and they first went to look for an electronic paper trail, they didn't find one. They eventually found a paper trail.
Wow.
And figured out this guy had printed out thousands of pages of information and just took it with him.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, so... And even if the fraud isn't coming from North Korea or, fake IDs and stuff, the other big issue that's going on, and there's a whole subreddit on it, and I talked to Steve Pegler about it last month, overemployment. There's this whole trend in the tech area, but it's expanding beyond that now, where people have 2 or even 3 full-time jobs, and they're supposed to be working from 8 to 5, and they're doing all 3 jobs, and they're all remote. And so managers sometimes have a problem getting somebody scheduled for a meeting or things like that. And maybe sometimes the antenna go up. But if you go to the Overemployment subreddit, there are story after story about how to pull this off and how to lie to your boss, how to hide employment number 2 and number 3, make sure don't put it on your LinkedIn or make your LinkedIn private so that employer number 1 doesn't see the other one. All these different things that people have. And they've also got technology because employers are monitoring their employees for, trying to make sure people are actually working when they're supposed to. And one of the things they're looking for is activity on the computer, is the mouse. If the mouse doesn't move, the computer will, go to sleep. And to keep that from happening, which might set off an alarm if somebody's monitoring behavior, you can buy on Amazon. And in fact, I'm going to post in the show notes a link to this, because people will not believe me that this is really a thing. You can buy a thing called a mouse jiggler. And what it does is physically just micro move your mouse back and forth a little bit so it looks like you're working, as far as the computer goes.
Just enough to trick
nuts.
your employer's monitoring software into thinking that you're sitting at your desk, clicking and doing your job. Yep.
Yeah. And so, that goes down. And I think overemployment's a problem. And I think it's fraud. If you're, their argument, people who are doing it, and when you read the subreddit arguments about it, they say, I'm getting the job done. My job as an employee is to do the minimum amount of work that I can get away with it without getting fired. And the employer's job is to pay me as little as they possibly have to. I mean, you hear that a lot, but I think both of those are wrong. Those are the wrong assumptions, but
it's certainly the wrong way to run your business if you're trying to, hire good employees and then have employees do good work. And I agree with you. To me, that's just flat out fraud.
Yeah. But at the same time, and it is a good morning HR drinking game here when we, because it comes up so often. It's a performance issue, though. It's a performance management issue, and it's a leadership and supervisory problem. Because anytime you can blame management for the problem, yeah, it's probably true, right? And
so it is probably true.
Yeah.
You said at the beginning about the union avoidance stuff. My conclusion over 30 years of doing employment work and doing union work is, if a company gets a union voted in, it's probably because their managers were not listening to their employees.
Right.
And this is the same thing. I think a lot of this comes down to an employer that thinks it needs to count its employees' mouse clicks doesn't really know how it wants to measure employee performance, or it hasn't come up with a better way of doing it. And so you create this incentive for the employee to spend $50 on an Amazon mouse clicker rather than the employee just becoming better at their job and providing, better output, quality, whatever it is they're supposed to be putting together, which is usually a failure of the manager. And then, like you said, your drinking game is always somebody's really good at their job, at the substance of it. So then let's make them a manager, but let's not train them how to handle the people who report to them.
Right.
It's like the great baseball player never makes the great manager. Right. It's the guy who was like the scrappy backup catcher is always a better dugout manager than the guy who was really good, because the guy who was really good just is like, well, we'll go be good.
Right. Yeah. Do what I do. Right. Yeah.
Right.
I cut my HR teeth in healthcare 30 years ago. And even then we would always talk about, just because somebody's is a good nurse doesn't mean they're going to be a good nurse manager. And we'd see it over and over, and you get somebody in there it's always on the employer. I think most people, you can train them to be a good manager, a good supervisor, a good leader, but you've got to invest money and time. You can't say, okay, you're promoted on Friday, so be here Monday to be the manager. I mean, that's just not a way to do it.
Agreed, 100%.
And that's where most of your employee relations issues come from. Managers who are, just not doing, letting situations fester, not being responsive. Like you say, most of the companies that end up with unions, in my experience, are the ones that deserved them. And
right.
The problem is the sad part is the unions rarely deliver for the employees what they promise either. And so, it's so the employees are getting screwed both ways. But with this stuff, I understand why employers even if you've got good management, want to use the technology for security, cybersecurity and all that, and to measure productivity and making sure people aren't stealing data and all that. But every employee should have some objective performance management. There should be some standard to say, this is how, if it's piecework of some sort, this is how much you've got to produce. We expect you to generally produce this much per hour, per day, whatever. Or these are the milestones on your technical project if you're a coder, and we expect you to be able to generate, meet your deadlines. But, we've got too many. I think there's too many people whose job is to be a working manager. And so they've got their own deadlines. They've got their own things to worry about. And they're not, their primary job is not motivating, incentivizing, and improving the performance of their team.
Right. And I think also besides, companies not knowing how to measure the employees' productivity or performance, I think a lot of it becomes a trust issue. I know we've talked about this before. For how many years until 2020 was remote work, when someone proposed it as a reasonable accommodation, the answer was not no, but hell no, we can't ever do it. I know the pandemic forced it on a lot of us, but it does work, and people do generally, perform better and are more productive given that as an option, at least in some cases. But I think the reluctance was, if I let my employee work from home, he's going to be eating Cheetos and watching Jeopardy at 3:00 in the afternoon. He's not going to be doing his job. And I think this mouse monitoring and other stuff is just an extension of that lack of trust in the employee to be doing the job that they need to do.
And, we've got pretty tight performance management stuff. And our stuff, we can see on a daily basis how much work gets done. Are we meeting our clients' expectations and our service level agreements and stuff? So we know. I think if companies haven't taken the time to set that up and, and again, management's not doing it, then they're going to rely on, looking busy. And it used to be, here comes the boss, look busy. And, there's the
boss button on the old Tetris game before the computer was even connected to the internet.
Yeah, well, you and I are of the age where we're getting ready to start watching Matlock a lot. But for the younger generation, explain what the Tetris reference is, because it's pretty funny to look back at it now and see we're still dealing with the same issue.
For me, my experience with it in law school, I worked at an energy company in Houston as a law clerk, and we had a computer in the office, the little bullpen that the law clerks sat in, and it was a green and black screen monitor. It wasn't even a color monitor, and there was a Tetris game on there. And in the top right corner of the screen, it said boss button. And if you click the boss button, the Tetris game went away and instead made the screen look like an Excel spreadsheet. And that was your way of hiding that you were goofing off and playing a game on company time if the boss came to peep over your shoulder.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that's always been bad management by walking around. The idea behind that was being in contact with your employees, knowing what's going on, having conversations with them, being plugged in to what's going on in the culture. But what it really, for a lot of managers, what it meant was make sure people look busy. And, it's like the old joke, Jesus is coming, look busy. And, that kind of, attitude. And so we're just doing it now remote.
And look, if you're going to tell your employees that you're going to measure their performance by the number of times their mouse gets clicked, then that's the performance that you're going to drive.
Yeah.
Right.
Incentives matter. It's economics 101.
Right.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And from all of us at Imperative, we wish you a prosperous 2025. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 180 and enter the keyword jiggler. That's JIGGLER. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Patrick Richter. So employers are implementing the software to manage, and I've seen some of the software, and some of it's really, pretty impressive. There's software out there that'll lay over the entire network. And so you have Zoom calls, and it monitors the conversations on the Zoom meetings, and even gives employers feedback about sentiment, content. We've all, most of us have been on a Zoom call now where it had Fireflies or one of those other programs recording it and taking notes. And the AI is really good and gives you a good summary of the meeting and who said what and what the action items were. How long did this meeting take? What was the conversation? Was it on topic? All these things. And then you mentioned plugging USBs in, all the kinds of things that people do, paying attention to what emails get sent and all of that. I see why employers do those things. And sometimes, especially when you trend that data, you say, hey, we're really wasting a lot of time on this kind of effort that's not value producing. So let's cut these meetings. Let's get rid of some of these. And maybe that raw data is useful for some of that.
Yeah, it reminding me of a post I saw the other day on social media that was like, it was two panels, and the first panel was a guy sitting in a meeting, and the thought bubble over his head was, this meeting could have been an email.
Yeah.
And then the second bubble was the same guy at his computer, and he's like, I get too damn many emails.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and so, I see why employers are doing it, and I think there's value to it. But again, it can't substitute for for good management. But now you got the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau came out a couple of weeks ago and said that the software companies themselves, and this is a reversal of what the Federal Trade Commission has said about 15 years ago. Now the CFPB, which is probably the least business-friendly government agency out there right now, but they came out and said these software companies that employers are using to monitor employee productivity are basically consumer reporting agencies, that they're like the credit bureaus or your background screening company, because they're collecting information on an employee. Now, I know the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I've lived it for the last 30 years, and there's no way under the way the law is written or any existing court decisions that these software companies or even employers' use of this data qualifies as a consumer report. But they're making that argument, and right. Certainly, now who knows what the Trump administration is going to do? And we got Loper Bright, right? And so
but that CFPB thing wasn't even a regulation.
Right.
Loper Bright is deference to the courts have to defer to agency interpretation of regulations. The CFPB thing's not even a reg. It's what is it called? A circular.
A circular, yeah.
Some sort of
which
notice
is like their logic often. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not in the business of prognosticating the future, at least not accurately. I told a client the other day that I'm 0 for 30 years at guessing what somebody else is going to do, what their motives are. But I'd be willing to bet that as of about a month from now, the CFPB is no longer going to hold the position that the software companies are handling consumer data in a way that makes them subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
Right. And certainly if employers are buying information about an employee from somebody else and it's not their own employees' activity while they're their employees, that probably is a consumer report. But if you're monitoring what I'm doing on my computer, on my company computer while I'm supposed to be at work, and you're using software to generate that information, I think that'd be dubious.
That's an enormous stretch in my opinion. Yeah. And especially to hold all the software company is doing is analyzing the data. They're not even, to the extent the Fair Credit Reporting Act is to make sure that the underlying data is fair.
Right. And accurate.
In these cases, the AI or the software company that's evaluating the employee performance sort of in bulk is all that they're just running the math.
Right.
It's the employer that's providing the raw data about what the employees are doing and the mouse clicks and everything else.
And that employee monitoring is also, there's a new lawsuit from an Apple employee saying that, well, Apple is monitoring their employees or spying on us. Well, I got news for you. I mean, we've all got these devices, and yes, they are spying on us, but, but we know it. I don't think any of us are surprised to find out that that's happening. But with these Apple employees, it's, as I read what was written about the summaries of the lawsuit, is the employee was saying, well, Apple will give us Apple devices, but there's things we can't do on them because Apple doesn't want us to do it on their devices. And so it's easier on us if we just use our own devices. And so Apple's paying attention to what we're doing when they're using company resources, networks, and doing company work on our personal devices, and that's not fair. Well, I'm like, I'm not sure I buy that argument.
I don't. If you're accessing my data and my network through a device, and you're doing it to circumvent the restrictions I put on the device I asked you to use, I don't know that you got much of an argument that you're being spied on, at least not in a way that you haven't consented to. We've for years had company policies that said, it goes all the way back to the stuff you stash in the locker in the company, changing room. We're going to search it, and you don't have any right of privacy of what's behind that locker. This is just the digital version of that.
Yeah, and you remember when bring your own device became a thing 10, 15 years ago. And even then I said, this is not a good idea. Employers just need to shell out their own money for the equipment that the employees are going to use, lock it down so that you know how it's being used, but then also enforce your policies. And it kind of seems like that's maybe where Apple might have dropped the ball here, is they said, don't use, we're giving you this equipment, use these Macs, use these iPhones, whatever, for work. And then, come on, they're a tech company. They know what the MAC addresses are for this equipment. They know when it's not being used. And they should have just said, no, don't do it. But nobody wants to be, do we really want the headaches of the employees complaining all the time that, I have to carry 2 stupid iPhones around?
If the Good Morning HR drinking game is about managers being good performers being promoted and being bad managers, the Pat Richter employment law drinking game is, well, we have a policy that would have prohibited that, but we didn't enforce it because it was inconvenient.
Yeah.
A policy in your handbook that you choose to ignore is just a problem. The only reason you want to have those things is so if somebody ever says you did something wrong, you can say, no, look, we followed our rules. And so if you have a rule and then you ignore it, and like you said, in this case, Apple damn well knows, like you said, they're a tech company. They know if somebody's not using the assigned device to access the network, they could stop it if they wanted to.
Right. But that, it boils down to, just trying to keep, get managers to do what they want to do. And those kind of policies, they want to use them often. Well, let's have this as a policy. We're not going to enforce it. We're not going to enforce it. We're not going to enforce it. Oh, now we're mad at this employee, so we're going to go find this and enforce it against them in this one instance.
Right. That's what I'm saying. The selective enforcement is terrible. But to kind of put a bow on the whole thing, a lot of this just comes down to, I think, people get in a hurry. You've got all these companies who are striving to hire employees, and you've got recruiters and hiring managers trying to get them in a hurry. And it's, take 15 extra minutes, take 1 extra step. If it smells fishy, double check, like you were telling me earlier, look and see, this LLC that this guy said he worked at Lockheed for, is it real? Right. Do your homework, do your due diligence.
Well, and, it's no secret, listeners, that we're a background screening company, and we're probably usually the most expensive option most of our clients come to. And most of them only come to us after things have gone wrong, right? I mean, you can buy a $50 background check on the internet all day long, but it's after the fact that, things go wrong and you're like, oh, suddenly we want to spend some money.
What costs more, hiring you on the front end to make sure that it's done right, or having to pay North Korea to get your data back?
To get your
I'd
server
rather
unlocked.
pay you.
Yeah, I would prefer you to as well, yeah. Well, hey, Patrick, that's all the time we have. Thanks for joining me for the very last episode of 2024.
Happy to put a bow on the year for you.
That's perfect. And thank you for listening today and throughout the year. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com. You can also find us on your favorite social media. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And as I say every week, thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up. Happy New Year.